I came home with groceries in my hands, just a few things I knew he liked. The house was too quiet. On the kitchen counter sat a white envelope perfectly placed. She leaned by the sink, arms folded, watching me without a word. He stood beside her, stiff, like he didn't know me. I looked at the envelope, then at him. He didn't blink. "You are nothing to us now," he said. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just set the bag down, gently, like I didn't want to wake something. I walked to my room, past the pictures they hadn't taken down yet. And I packed in silence. 3 days, the letter said. But they forgot. My name was never just on the mailbox. "Thank you for sitting with me. It matters more than you know." I didn't come here to shout or to stir up pity. I came to speak the kind of truth that sits heavy in your chest, but softens when someone else says, "I've felt that too." If you've ever poured yourself into something, brick by brick, year by year, only to be told your place in it doesn't matter anymore, then I think you'll understand. I know this kind of story doesn't make headlines. It doesn't end with cheers or confetti. It ends with a quiet door click, a packed bag, and a memory you don't know what to do with. So if any part of this feels familiar, if you've stood in a room where your name used to carry weight but now it barely echoes, I'd like to hear from you. You don't have to explain everything. Just let me know where you're listening from, or write this in the comments. I stood in silence. That's enough. I didn't have much when I started, but I had him, and that was enough to keep me moving. I was a single mother, not by choice, but by reality. There were no days off, no one to pass the baton to when I was tired. I was nurse when he had fevers, cook when the fridge was nearly empty, driver when it rained and his shoes were too thin, and the loudest voice in the crowd when he stood on any stage, no matter how small. I worked nights at the hospital, folded laundry at sunrise, and still managed to help him with schoolwork before dinner. I taught him how to tie his shoes, how to treat people kindly, how to speak up without being cruel. And when he had his first real idea for a business, I didn't hesitate. I dipped into what little savings I had, put my name on the lease, and used my credit to get things started. I even skipped a few of my own meals back then, just to help him keep the doors open. But I never asked for anything in return. Not a paycheck, not a favor. I only wanted to stay close, to be part of the life I helped build. I didn't ask to be paid. I asked to be remembered. I asked to belong. When he told me he was getting married, I was happy for him, truly. I even helped set the table for the engagement dinner, cooked his favorite stew, laid out the cloth napkins, and wore the earrings he bought me one Christmas when he was still too young to sign the card properly. I told myself this would be a new chapter. One where love would only grow, where family would stretch its arms wider. But things shifted before the ink dried on the marriage license. She moved in quickly and firmly, like the house had always belonged to her. Within weeks, the curtains I sewed myself were taken down and folded into a box in the garage. My wedding photo with his father, gone from the hallway wall, replaced with some abstract art that looked cold and expensive. Even the spices I'd organized for years were tossed out. She said they were too old, but I think she just didn't want my hands on the shelf anymore. She never said it directly, but she didn't have to. She moved like I was temporary, like I was furniture left behind by accident. I overheard her once on the phone. She called me the old shadow. And when I asked him later what she meant, he just laughed and said I was always too sensitive. That laugh didn't come from the boy I raised. It came from a man who had already started forgetting. And in that moment, I felt it, clear as rain on a window I no longer opened. I wasn't losing my room or my seat at the table. I was being erased, slowly and without apology, from the life I helped write. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing. If they'd just shouted and pushed me out the door, maybe it would have hurt less, because at least I would have known what I was dealing with. But instead, it was quiet things. They stopped telling me when they were going out, or if they did, they told me at the last minute, like an afterthought, as if I had no need to prepare or be included. I'd hear the garage door open early on a Saturday and see them drive off with the children in the back seat, all dressed up for something they never mentioned. When I asked about it later, she'd shrug and say it was last minute. They started putting my things in the garage, my sewing machine, a quilt I hadn't finished, boxes of photos I kept in the hallway cupboard. One day, I opened the linen closet, and my old blankets were gone, replaced with neatly labeled storage containers that didn't belong to me. I didn't argue. I just stood there, staring into a space that used to smell like lavender and felt like mine. Then came the moment that broke something quiet inside me. I was sitting in the living room, tying one of the little one's shoelaces, and he looked up and said, so innocently, "Mommy says you don't know when to leave." He didn't even know what he was saying. His eyes were soft, but those words hit like a slap I didn't see coming. I smiled at him, finished his shoes, and sent him off without saying a word. Then I went to my room, closed the door, and I let myself cry, but just that once. Because I wasn't broken, and I wasn't weak, I was waiting. Waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be mistaken for surrender. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I always did the laundry on Tuesdays, folded it neatly, and left their things on the edge of the couch, just like I used to do when he was younger, and still called me from his bedroom to ask where his socks were. That day, I had just come in from hanging sheets on the line when I saw it. An envelope, white and thick, sitting on the kitchen counter like it had been waiting to ruin something. She was standing near the window with her arms crossed, not saying a word, but there was a satisfaction in her stillness that I felt before I even read a line. He came in from the hallway, wouldn't look me in the eye, wouldn't even clear his throat, just nodded toward the envelope like he was too ashamed to say it out loud. I opened it slowly, already knowing. A 3-day eviction notice, typed and signed, like I was some stranger who had wandered in off the street. I stood there holding that paper while the floor beneath my feet felt less like a home and more like a trapdoor. I paid the first down payment on that house. My name was on the original loan papers. When he wanted to start his business and couldn't get a loan on his own, it was my credit that made it happen. I took on that risk, not because I needed to, but because I believed in him. I gave up vacations, ignored aches in my back, and stayed past the years I should have been resting, all so he could build something with his name on it. And now they were handing me paper like I was a squatter, as if the walls didn't remember my hands painting them, as if the garden didn't bloom from seeds I'd planted in my old shoes. I stood still, not out of fear, but out of calculation. They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I'd leave quietly, maybe beg, maybe weep. What they forgot was that I never left myself behind. What they forgot was that my name wasn't just on the mailbox, it was on the title. And soon it would be the only one that mattered. I left without a scene. I folded my things the way I always had, neatly with care, because I wasn't going to let them take my dignity too. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I didn't leave behind a mess or a note. I walked out with 2 suitcases and a quiet that felt heavier than the bags in my hands. I stood on that front step for a moment, just one breath, and then I turned away from the house I helped build. The same house I used to rock him to sleep in. The same hallway where his first drawings once hung with tape and pride. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had cried all the tears I needed to back when he first started pulling away. I took a cab to Mavis's place. She was a friend from church, older than me by a few years, and sharper than most folks twice her age. We hadn't spoken much in recent months, not out of conflict, just out of life happening too fast. But when I knocked on her door, she didn't ask what happened. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't ask why I only brought 2 bags. She just moved aside, led me to the spare room, and turned on the kettle. There was something in her silence that comforted me more than any words would have. She made me a cup of tea the way she knew I liked it, just a drop of milk, no sugar. We didn't talk much that evening. She just sat beside me while I sipped, and in that silence I finally allowed myself to breathe. Later that night, when she had gone to bed, I went through one of the bags and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in over 20 years. It was old, the corners fraying, the latch loose, but the contents inside were exactly what I needed. I laid everything out on the floor, one document at a time. The original house deed with my name listed first. The loan approval letter with my signature guaranteeing the business startup. The receipts from when I paid off his early debts. Copies of emails where I gave permission to use my credit score. a notarized agreement from when he was just starting, promising me equity. I had kept everything. Not because I didn't trust him then, but because I had spent a lifetime learning that love doesn't always come back the way you gave it. I stared at those papers like they were old friends. They had aged with me. Faded ink, folded corners, small tears along the edges, but still strong enough to speak. They were more than just documents. They were promises. They were proof that I had not imagined my place in that home, in that business, in his life. They had tried to erase me with one envelope, but I had 20 pages that said otherwise. The next morning, after breakfast, I made a call. I sat at Mavis's kitchen table, the sun just starting to stretch through the window, and dialed the number of a lawyer I had met once at a community event. I didn't tremble. I didn't rush. I told him the truth, every word of it, and by the end of that conversation, he was already arranging a meeting. He told me to bring everything I had, and I told him I had it all. I hung up the phone and stared at the table for a long time. Not out of fear, not even out of sadness. I was just sitting with the weight of it all. The years I had given, the silence I had accepted, the way I had allowed myself to be pushed to the edge without pushing back. But this time, I wasn't going to ask for space. I was going to take back what was already mine. They thought I had walked away with nothing. But what they didn't know, what they never asked, was who held the real keys. They erased me with one letter. I answered with 20 documents. And I was just getting started. When I sat across from the lawyer and opened that old box in his office, I watched his face carefully. Not because I needed his approval, but because I wanted to see if the weight I had carried all these years could finally be understood by someone else. He took his time. He didn't rush through the pages or skim over the fine print. He read every document the way I remembered living it. Slowly, carefully, with attention. Every signature I had placed with trust, every stamp that once felt like a small victory, every line of ink that had once meant hope. And when he was done, he leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and said, softly, "They won't see this coming." I didn't smile, I just nodded, because I already knew that. He confirmed what I suspected but never said out loud. My name was not just listed as a co-signer. I owned 60% of that house. 60%. More than half of what they tried to push me out of was legally mine. And the business, the very one he built his pride on, the one they boasted about at family gatherings where she liked to tell people how hard they'd worked for their success, well, I held the majority there too. 52% to be exact. Quietly on paper, and signed with my name in blue ink from a pen he once borrowed. All those years ago, when he was desperate and eager and full of ambition, he came to me with a promise. "I'll pay you back, I swear," he said. And I told him, "Just keep your word." That was all I asked. Not interest, not control, just honesty and respect. But he didn't keep his word. I did. I kept mine in a box under my bed and in a heart that kept believing longer than it should have. The lawyer asked me if I wanted to go straight to court or offer mediation first. I told him I was done speaking to people who only hear what benefits them. He said we'd file immediately. He would prepare the case, gather additional records, and set a hearing date. As I listened to him go over the next steps, outlining what would happen, what I'd need to say, what he'd handle, I didn't feel fear or revenge. I felt something else entirely, relief. I wasn't fighting to win something new. I was just reclaiming what had always been mine. I thought back to that day in the kitchen when I opened their envelope. The way she smiled like she had just checked off a box. The way he couldn't even say the words himself. And now I had my own letter. Not one written to push someone out, but one that reminded everyone where things began and who made it possible. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to threaten. I never once had to raise my voice. All I had to do was open a box, take out the truth, and place it gently into the right hands. They thought I was old and quiet and worn down. They thought silence meant weakness, that staying in the background meant I had nothing left to say. But I've learned something over the years. People confuse humility for helplessness. They confuse calm for surrender. But the quiet ones, the ones who endure, who carry and still show up with a steady voice and a steady hand, we're the ones they should be careful with. Because we don't explode. We document, we remember. And when it's time, we don't shout, We show. I never needed to raise my voice. I only needed to be heard once. And soon I would be. The day of the hearing came with no rain, no thunder, no dramatic sky, just a plain blue morning, steady and quiet, the kind of day where you can almost forget something big is about to happen. I wore navy, simple and soft, the same dress I used to wear to church on holidays. I didn't want to dress like a woman out for a fight. I wanted to dress like someone who belonged in every room they tried to shut me out of. I arrived early and sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, the folder on my lap, my hands resting on top of it like I was holding something fragile. But I wasn't. I was holding proof, and it was heavier than it looked. When they arrived, I heard them before I saw them. Laughter echoing down the hall, short and smug, the kind people do when they think they've already won. He was wearing a new suit, looked like one of those ones from the catalog she used to leave on the kitchen table when I still made breakfast. She walked beside him in sharp heels, sunglasses still on indoors, like she couldn't risk even the lights in the hallway seeing her real eyes. They didn't look at me, not once. She clutched his arm like they were there for a celebration. Inside the courtroom, their lawyer did most of the talking. He was smooth, polished, confident, the kind who likes to hear himself speak. He called me a guest, said I was extended kindness and shelter, and that I had mistaken that for ownership. He said I had no legal right to remain on the property and was simply trying to disrupt a family home out of bitterness. I sat still. I didn't flinch. Every word he said passed over me like wind against stone because I knew what was coming. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small in that room. The judge was measured, calm, but firm. She listened to everything, gave each side its time. Then she turned to me and asked, "Do you have a response to these claims?" I looked up, gently, not rushed, not shaken. I stood. I didn't need a microphone or a raised voice. I only needed to move one step forward. I held the folder with both hands and walked to the bench. I handed it over, and the room shifted. Quiet like the moment before a storm breaks. I watched her open the folder and begin to read. I didn't speak as she flipped through the house deed, the business shares, the contracts, the receipts, the original letters. Every turn of a page was like a heartbeat I had waited years to feel again. My name, over and over again, written clearly, legally, undeniably. I saw their lawyer lean over to whisper something to my son, and I watched him pale before the judge even said a word. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just waited. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. About standing in a room where everyone assumed you were powerless, and showing them you had been the backbone all along. I didn't come with arguments. I came with truth. And I handed it over with the same hands that once buttoned his shirts for school, stirred his soup when he was sick, and signed those documents so he could have a future. They called me a guest who outstayed. But what they didn't know, what they refused to believe, was that I wasn't just staying. I had been holding the foundation the whole time. The judge didn't rush through her words. She turned each page slowly, read each line as if she wanted everyone in the room to feel the weight of what had been ignored for too long. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and looked at the courtroom before speaking. There was a stillness, the kind that comes right before something irreversible. And then she said it clearly, without hesitation, her voice calm and steady. Mrs. E holds 60% ownership of the property in question and 52% ownership of the registered business listed under Exhibit B. There were no bells, no music, no sudden dramatic pause, just facts. Pure and unshakable. For a moment, I think the entire room forgot how to breathe. The silence didn't feel empty, it felt full. Full of years, full of unpaid debts, full of what had been buried under comfort and pride and assumption. I looked straight ahead, not at them, not at anyone. I just looked forward because I already knew. But they didn't. And now they had to. I heard her first. A sharp inhale, like she had been slapped without warning. She tightened her grip on his arm, her hand curled so tightly into the fabric of his suit, I thought she might tear it. She wasn't used to losing. She wasn't used to being seen. And right then, she knew the game had changed. He shifted in his seat, his face no longer smug, his eyes darting like he was looking for some kind of exit. And then, with the heat of someone whose control was slipping fast, he stood up and shouted, "This is a setup." His voice cracked halfway through, but he didn't seem to notice. He pointed at me like I had betrayed him, like I had planned this, like I hadn't just quietly placed the truth in the judge's hands while he was too busy laughing in hallways. The judge didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She raised the gavel, struck it once, and said firmly, "It's all valid." No confusion, no gray area. Everything in that folder, every line, every name, every number, it was all valid. He sank back into his chair like someone had taken the floor out from under him. She crossed her arms tightly, still looking at the judge, but not hearing a word. Their lawyer sat stiff, lips pressed into a thin line, like he knew there was nothing left to say. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I didn't lean back or whisper to anyone. I just nodded once. That was all. Because I didn't need a parade or applause. I didn't need to raise my hands in triumph. I had already won the moment I stood up and refused to be erased. I had already won when I chose truth over comfort, documentation over begging, and quiet strength over loud resentment. They had tried to paint me out of the picture, not realizing I held the frame. And in that courtroom, with just a few words, the judge reminded them who had been holding it all along. That nod wasn't for them. It was for me. For the years I stayed silent. For the nights I didn't sleep. For the boxes I never unpacked because I never knew when I'd be asked to leave. That nod was for every time I gave, every time I forgave, and every time I thought maybe, just maybe, love would be enough. And now, I no longer needed to wonder. I had something better than love that begged to be seen. I had the truth, and it was enough. I didn't rush to leave the courtroom. I gathered my things slowly, carefully, the way I've done everything in life, without panic, without spectacle. I closed the folder, slid the papers back into the same envelope they tried to use against me weeks before, and stood without looking back. As I stepped into the hallway, I passed them. He was standing still, jaw tight, shoulders no longer proud but uncertain, like someone trying to figure out how things unraveled without him noticing. His voice was shaking, lips slightly parted like he wanted to say something, anything. But nothing came. Not an apology. Not a question. Just silence. She wasn't there. The seat beside him had been empty since the gavel hit the desk. She had left quickly, without turning her head. Maybe she didn't want to see me win. Or maybe she finally realized I was never the shadow. I walked past them like I was walking through fog. Clear in my purpose. Quiet in my movement. The same way I used to walk through the house at night, checking the locks, folding the clothes he left in the dryer, turning off lights he forgot to switch. I had been walking behind him all his life, picking up pieces, cleaning up what didn't show. But not anymore. I took the long way home that day. Not because I was avoiding anything, but because I needed a little more time to feel what peace sounded like when it returned. No more shouting behind closed doors. No more being called sensitive when I asked for kindness. No more being seen as a favor instead of a foundation. When I reached the house, I stood outside for a moment. The door looked the same, but something felt different. This time, I wasn't standing there with a bag of groceries or waiting for someone to unlock it. This time, I had the key, and I had the right. I opened the door slowly. The air was still. Dust had gathered on the windowsills, and the kitchen smelled like it hadn't been used properly in weeks. The plants were dry. The fruit bowl was empty. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full. Full of everything I had held in for far too long. I placed my folder on the hallway table, took off my shoes, and walked barefoot across the floor I once mopped every Sunday morning. I didn't rush to clean or rearrange. I just let the house speak. It had missed being seen too. I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle, turned the knob with the same fingers that had twisted it 1,000 times before. I lit a candle on the windowsill, the one with the faint scent of honey and fig. I sat at the small table where I used to sit with him after school, where he once cried over math homework and spilled juice and told me about the girl he liked. I sat in the exact same chair, and I let it all settle. They took the love. Or at least, they tried to. They threw it away like something used up, something too quiet to keep. But I kept the deed. And not just to the house, to my name, to my time, to my worth. I never asked for the world. I just wanted space in the one I helped build. And now I had it. Not because I demanded it, but because I remembered what was mine and refused to be talked out of it. Peace doesn't shout. It doesn't arrive with loud footsteps or breaking glass. It breathes. It settles in corners. It waits. And when you let it in, it feels like coming home without having to knock. It had been a quiet week since the courtroom. The kind of quiet that doesn't press down on your chest, but instead fills the space like soft light. I went about my days slowly, giving the house time to breathe again, just like I needed to. I watered the plants, opened the curtains, let the breeze carry out what didn't belong anymore. I cleaned out the cabinets, not in anger, but with purpose. I removed the fancy kitchen gadgets they brought in, the ones no one ever really used, and made room again for the old wooden spoons and chipped bowls that had seen real love, real meals, real years. Each task was like brushing dust off parts of myself they had tried to pack away. Then one morning, while I was wiping down the kitchen table, my phone buzzed. A message. Just one line. "Can we talk?" No name attached, but I knew it was him. It didn't surprise me. Shame has a way of knocking when the house is already clean. I stood there for a moment, reading it, letting the words settle. There was no apology in it. Just a reach, a tug at the same hand he once let go of so easily. But I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. I wasn't. I had already forgiven him long before that message ever arrived. But forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door. It doesn't mean pretending the wound wasn't there. It just means I let go of the weight, and I didn't need him to carry it with me. I sat with that message for a while, thinking about everything I'd given and everything they had taken. Not just space, but presence. Not just comfort, but identity. And when I thought about what I truly wanted moving forward, the answer was simple. I didn't want to build bridges that would only crumble again. I wanted to build something lasting, even if it didn't involve them. So I made a decision. I called the lawyer and told him to redirect 50% of the company profits to a local women's shelter. The same one I volunteered at when I had the time, back before the house became a place of tiptoeing and whispers. I remembered those women, how they walked in quiet and left slower still, carrying nothing but pain and a plastic bag. I wanted them to know that someone remembered what it felt like to give everything and still be cast aside. That someone like them now had power in her hands and chose to give it freely. I didn't tell him I made the donation. He'd find out in his own time. I wanted him to see what nothing could do. He once told me I was nothing, and now he sees what nothing owns. He sees the name that was always written beneath his success, the name he tried to erase but couldn't, and not because I shouted it, but because I lived it. Later that evening, I sat outside with a cup of tea, the sun sinking slow behind the trees, the air warm and still. I watched the breeze move the curtains just slightly, the way it used to when he was young and the window fan ran through the summer nights. I sat in that silence, not lonely, just steady, holding everything I had become. And I thought about how loud their decisions once felt. All the slamming doors, the sharp words, the forced smiles, but I never needed to match their volume. I didn't need to scream or break things or beg. I didn't need to win with noise. I only needed to raise my value and carry it in full view. They made me feel small. I made myself whole. And all without raising my voice. Just my worth. Just my memory. Just my name. If you've ever been written out of the story you helped build, if you've ever been pushed aside in a home that wouldn't exist without your hands, your heart, your years, I see you. And if you've ever sat in silence while someone else took the credit, took the space, took everything but your memory, I know how that feels. You don't have to explain it all. You can just tell me in the comments, or write these words, "I kept the deed." That's enough. And if this story found you tonight, and you're sitting with something heavy in your chest, please do subscribe. You're not alone. Not now. Not ever.